the remix version. I feel like I'm on a game show in the early 70s.
Hello. It's noon on Tuesday. Thus, we are doing the Noon on Tuesday podcast. So I know things might look a little different because Gina's not here. She's in Africa, literally. I'm not being funny. She's probably swimming with sharks right now. So I'm here today with my fellow cheesemonger, Claire. I don't know if there's a clapping sound.
Applause, please.
I don't know. Do you want to tell us where you work and stuff?
Yeah.
Where do you work?
I work at Benissimo Cheese. I work at Benissimo Cheese in Mission Hills. I've been a cheesemonger there for 2.5 years, going on 2.5 years. I love cheese. I took a break from working in social services to be a curd nerd. And I really enjoy it.
Awesome. So, her being a fellow curd nerd, we're here today to nerd out with our curd out. And we're going to do a really extra nerdy curducation podcast. And today we are going to be talking about what are those little cheese crystals in cheese, obviously. What are they all about? And what the heck are they? And why are they so popular? So a couple, I guess we'll start with that kind of what people come in and ask for. They're really popular. People always use that as a descriptor when they're looking for a cheese that they've had before in the past. They'll say, oh, I really want that Gouda with the...
Kind of like in pantomimes, they'll come in and be like, that cheese with like little crunchy crystals
with the salt. What other terms do they use?
Some people think it's sugar, or sometimes like I've even had someone like bite into the cheese as I'm giving them a sample and their eyes kind of go wide and they're like, is there sand in here?
Yeah,
like,
what is this? Yeah, but typically pretty popular.
Yeah.
Actually, we're going to tell you what those are. For the most part, there's lots of different types of crystals, but we'll probably concentrate on the two most popular kind. So should we start with
a crystal formation refresher?
Yeah, of course.
Because this is the curd.
We got to know what a crystal is in the first place.
Okay, and to help us demonstrate, we brought some building blocks.
Woohoo!
Because science is always better through
with Legos.
With Legos, yeah. Or like Duplos or whatever these are.
Oh, sorry, Legos.
Mega blocks, I think.
Mega blocks.
So crystals form, right, when you have a lot of different stuff, but in the form of, when we're talking about cheese, when there is a super saturation of the building blocks that are necessary to make this. So if you have all these building blocks of crystals, but they're not very saturated, if you have them in a box and you shake that box a lot, chances are they're probably not going to collide with each other so much, and they're probably just going to like bounce and skid off.
Yeah.
But when you put
it's like bumper cars.
Yeah, totally. But if you had like a 3D version of bumper cars, the chances of these crystals colliding and actually sticking together is much greater. And so what we see in cheese production is that super saturation of a lot of those building blocks of crystals, things like calcium, things like phosphate, things like amino acids.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so for the amino acids, so I guess we go into tyrosine maybe?
Sure.
Okay. So tyrosine is a popular cheese crystal that you'll mostly find in Parmesan styles or hard Italian styles, Goudas or Howdas, however you'd like to say it. What other styles? Maybe like Alpine Swiss styles. Yeah. So those are super popular, mostly found on the interior part. And I don't know if Yeah, I don't know if you guys could see this, but they usually look kind of like freckled specks.
Little white dots.
They're spears inside of the cheese, but like obviously once you cut the surface of the cheese, it kind of just looks like a circle. So yeah.
So how does tyrosine come about?
Tyrosine comes about because of the microbes that are used to cultivate the cheese. So the cultures
like
used
the starter
in there.
cultures.
The starter culture, yeah. So most common one would be the lactobacillus helvet. How do you say that last word?
Helveticus.
Helveticus. I've been trying to say that all day. I'm not a scientist, y'all. So these microbes are usually added to, like we said, Italian styles, Dutch styles, Swiss styles, and they help with preventing bitterness in the cheese and adding more of that like nutty flavor in the final product. So this particular culture, though, has a real knack at breaking down peptides, which is the protein chain. And so they'll break them down into free amino acids. So tyrosine would be one of those amino acids. So as they're breaking down, they're kind of floating around.
This is tyrosine. This is a peptide chain.
This is a peptide chain. And they're floating around and they're bumping into each other. And eventually some of them will form, if you think of like the Legos in a bag and you were to shake them up, eventually some of them would latch onto each other, or maybe like a snowflake attaching to another snowflake, and eventually you get a snowball. Those are eventually going to crystallize and form that dense little crunchy bit in the cheese.
Or like glob tag or blob tag.
Blob tag.
Like,
what's
did you
blob
play
tag?
blob tag in elementary
Tell
school?
me what that is.
Blob tag. It's the most dangerous thing children can do on an elementary school playground. You have like one person, right, who's the like it, right? And then you have all these other children who are like running around, like that. And then once they tag one person, they have to grab hands, right, with them. And then you have two children running around, being flung around the playground. And it like basically then gets to
don't
this
do
like,
this at home.
Don't seriously. It was banned from my Hacienda Elementary School.
And bam, you get a tyrosine crystal.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you just think of glob.
Glob. Depends, the region, NorCal, SoCal.
Yeah.
I think it was
tag
blob up north.
That's how you will think of these little crystals. So they're not salt, they're not sugar. They're a little protein blob tag crystal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But different than other types, right? We've got so here on this other end, we've got calcium lactate, which I don't know if you can see.
Ooh.
This is a cheddar. Calcium lactate usually forms on the outside, the exterior, and a lot of people think it's mold. It has kind of like this white powdery smear look to it. Sometimes you can see there. It usually tends to form on the outside because there's this nice flat plastic surface that they've wrapped the cheese in, and that provides like a nice sheer environment. Where moisture can collect and where
it looks
crystals...
more like the Milky Way or something like that.
And so these tend to be, so tyrosine crystals, right, tend to be a little bit more like firm and crunchy, like Jess was saying. Whereas these kind of are more like powdery, smeary crystals.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I have a lot of customers, when I cut them, especially like the end, the kind of like heel of the cheese, I'll have to tell them, hey, just so you know, this isn't mold. It's, calcium lactate crystals.
Yeah.
Which you were saying used to be
a flaw. So they would consider that a flaw. So they were trying to find ways to get rid of that or prevent that from happening because of the customer
misconception.
That it was mold. And I think that maybe that was like affecting sales or the popularity of that cheese. But now that people are more familiar with, I believe, I don't know if this is true, there's no like evidence behind this, but people are asking for the crunchiness of like Goudas and
Yeah.
Parmesans that I feel like that's trickling over to like
Cheddars.
the cheddars, and I get less people like saying like, "Ooh, this is moldy," and we're like, "No, those are similar type of cheese crystals, a natural byproduct
Yeah.
of the aging process, natural byproduct of the milk in that one, yeah."
Yeah.
And so it's like, guys, why do we want to change who you are? Just like accept what you are, and it's delicious. And like we are now being inclusive of that. Like you don't need that makeover.
It's like the theme of every like coming of age story ever.
Yeah.
13 going on 30.
Yeah.
All of these movies.
Pretty in pink.
Yep, you're beautiful just the way you
You're
are.
beautiful and you're tasty just the way you are. So yeah, it's interesting to kind of see that come around.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just the other day as we were kind of researching and fine tuning our knowledge of this stuff, I actually even went to, I know, guys, don't hate me, but I even saw it on Tillamook, like a comment page that they were like having
on
to
Tillamook's website.
They're having to explain to the customers that this is not mold and that it's completely natural. And like so many comments on there were saying like, "Oh my God, I always cut that off." Like just so you could still see that there's still a lot of educating that needs to be happening. And even though the person was explaining it, you could tell people's perception of that has been so long. I think it'll take a little while, but I think the tyrosine is helping
The calcium lactate.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the Mutt and Jeff, like the big brother. It's like, paving the way for like the little brother to be cool in high school.
Yeah. And I think also with the even though the crystals don't impart any type of flavor, they are strongly associated with more flavorful cheeses. So it's like, oh, if you see that, you kind of can assume that this cheese is going to be packed with a lot of flavor or a certain type of flavor profile that you are interested in. But we were discussing maybe like, do the textures, even though they don't have the crystals themselves don't impart a flavor, do the textures themselves add to the overall pleasure of
enjoyment of the cheese?
Yeah. And maybe, and I don't know, and tasting it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have thoughts on that, but I also want to get back to the like actual crystal structure of the calcium lactate.
Yes.
Before, so people are not confused as we continue. So we talked about tyrosine, right, being like these peptide chains that get broken down over the course of proteolysis, over the course of the aging process, and then you've got all these free amino acids that kind of glob together to make tyrosine. Calcium lactate's different. Calcium lactate is this good bacteria breaking down specifically lactose, so the milk sugar that's present in cheese, and then so that's where you get that lactate part, and then of course binding with calcium ions. So again, you see that mostly on the outside. Because usually it needs an aqueous, like a watery environment for that to happen. And because with the cheddaring process, all the moisture is usually squeezed out from the interior. There's just that little residual moisture around the outside. And
typically it's on a rineless type of cheddar. Totally. So they're usually cryovac. So then there's that layer of...
Wait, break down what's cryovac.
Cryovac.
So is that what like Han Solo went into in like... after he died in one of the Star Wars?
Star Wars, yeah.
Not Star Trek.
We're not that nerdy. Cryovac, so it doesn't have a natural rind, but they put it in a plastic material, then they suck out all that air.
So like vacuum sealed.
Vacuum sealed. But there's probably maybe like a little bit of moisture that might develop between that. And then maybe some temperature change that might help facilitate that
excess water being lost as it's aging.
And that might develop that kind of dusty white crystallization on that cheddar.
Awesome.
Right?
So cool. Yeah.
I mean, do you agree?
Yes, I do. So I don't, that's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
That
No.
we have all these different crystals that are, and these are not even all of them, right? There's
No,
more. Other
there's
types
even
of
more,
crystals.
but we don't want to overwhelm the
Yeah,
audience. Also, we are not scientists, we are cheesemongers, and we are learning as the scientists are like putting out more. So people like Pat Pulaski, who we are huge fans of, if you want to come by the podcast anytime, you're welcome.
You're welcome, please.
Bill Nye, I would love to have you in, by the way. Huge
Alton
fan.
Brown.
Alton Brown.
I grew up on
We're
Good
shouting
Eats.
out people now.
This is the nerd. This is the Curd Nerd edition.
Yeah,
this
Curd
is
Nerd.
This is a space that is welcome and open to all
Yes.
food nerds or just
So-
nerd nerds.
What was I saying? I forgot.
We'll talk about
Oh,
those
the other
crystals
two. Oh, yeah,
later,
the
'cause
other
it's
crystals. Yeah,
complex.
it is complex. I don't know as much about them, but you might experience some other type of crystallization or crunchiness in like blue cheeses. If you've ever had like a Roquefort, or I think like Roaring 40s might have that like kind of grittiness.
Kind of like where those little holes are sometimes.
A lot of
right?
times, yeah, where those
Or little
holes
eyes.
develops. Yeah. So those are different kind of crystals. Usually, which one would
The
you say?
calcium
phosphate? Yeah,
and I never know how to pronounce it. Icate.
Icate. Yeah. If one
Struvite?
of our curd nerds could let us know how Icate, Ikaite, struvite. So those might be found more commonly on like a bloomy rind, but I think they're pretty minimal. Like I
Mhm.
don't know how much you would feel that, but then sometimes they might collect quite a bit on like a wash rind. So I've definitely like had that experience of like a grittiness, mouthfeel on like a wash rind,
Yeah.
where they're collecting on the outer part. But interestingly enough, those actually help with the ripening of the
Huh.
middle part too.
The crystals themselves help with the ripening.
Ripening of the inside, yes.
Interesting. See,
Yeah.
I always thought because you have like wash rind cheeses like Epoisse or Oma, right, or Taleggio, I always thought because they wash it with a salt brine that was just the residual salt
Salt.
crystals. Like
Yeah.
I'm like my customers, I'm like, I think it's salt.
Yeah, I think it's salt.
But no,
But
it's
we're
not salt.
learning, yeah. So apparently it is other types of cheese crystals. So just like people, there are all different types of cheese crystals out there.
This is where we sing, "We are the world."
Yeah.
That's great.
So
Awesome.
as we keep learning more about these cheese crystals, as there's more research being done, I mean, we will be happy to share that information with you guys, both in the shop and here on Noon on Tuesday, of course. But shall we dive into the textural
The texture.
pleasure?
The science of texture.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I recently learned it's called rheology.
Rheology.
Rheology, but it's spelled RHEOLOGY. And this is like this burgeoning scientific field that's studying the science of texture. And a lot of it has to do with non-food products, viscosity of things.
Yeah.
But was reading this fascinating article that they're talking about rheology, but then also another field called psychorheology, which is your perception, of the texture of food and how it affects it. So like the difference between like
super interesting.
the
Just because
difference-
as you're saying that, I'm thinking of specific customers who always mention like they don't like something because like the texture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you give them something else that has what we would perceive as the same flavor, but the texture is simply different. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is totally different.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah,
So-
continue. I'm fascinated.
Yeah. So some of the examples being, the difference between sugar and cotton candy, right? The two ingredients in both of those is just merely sugar.
Yeah.
But the texture totally changes our perception. Or why we enjoy gummy bears, as, which is basically just sugar and like a thickening agent. But why when people have tasted gummy bears in melted form, it's absolutely disgusting because it's way, way too sweet.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so that while, as you had mentioned before, the crystals scientists have said they don't have an actual flavor themselves.
Mhm.
There is the possibility that with psychorheology, our mentality and our perception of these cheeses does actually change with the crystal formation,
Yeah.
which is fascinating.
Super fascinating.
Um,
Whoa. Now we're getting into psychology, y'all.
yeah, and I mean I think this is a little rabbit hole away from cheese, but a lot of folks are interested in psychorheology because we're in this, we had like the phase of the food fads of no cholesterol, and then we had the no fat, and so everything got pumped full of sugar and carbs, and then in the 90s it was like, well, no carbs, so then everything got pumped full of like fat and sugar again. And then now we're in this interesting space where we want it all. We want healthy, natural foods, right, that are low in fat, low in sugar.
Yeah.
And so scientists are really trying to, and food scientists are trying to grapple with, how can we leverage texture? How can we leverage this thing that doesn't have theoretically any flavor to it,
Yeah.
but can change our mental perception of flavor,
Yeah.
and doesn't add calories. So it'd be interesting to see if, if crystals like tyrosine or calcium lactate can, in future years, go to, become part of foods that are maybe really low in fat or low in sugar, but then still give you that satisfying mouthfeel. And
yeah. Interesting. I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but I'm not quite sure. But it is such like a, fascinating topic because it is all like perception.
Yeah.
And
Like, what was the first time you had, or like, what is your most strong memory of like a cheese with crystals? And, what was it? Why did you enjoy it?
yeah.
Did you eat it with anything in particular?
No, just with
straight
up. Yeah. Probably an aged Gouda. As most people know, Midnight Moon was probably one of my favorite cheeses that I started buying at a cheese shop. That was like a repeat buy for me when I first started shopping at Venissimo, and it does have a little bit of those Tyrosine crystals in there. And we also bought a lot of Roaring 40s, which also had like that kind of gritty feel that added to that tasting experience, especially if you're new to cheese, because not only are you tasting some like awesome new cheeses, but then you're like, whoa, this texture is way different than those blue crumbles in that little plastic container.
Or that like wiggly cheese, right? Or wiggly cheese
that
product.
Smoked Gouda.
That I grew up on.
Not that there's anything wrong with it. There's always a place for a smooth cheese too, but
we're not cheese judgers.
No, we don't judge the cheese. But I definitely remember being like blown away by both the flavor and the texture, and maybe I was experiencing some of that psychorheology as well.
Yeah.
And so but I also I remember in terms of customer interactions that during the holidays one year I was working, and someone bought someone a piece of like the most perfect crystallized Beamster I'd ever seen in my whole entire freaking life. And they brought it back because it was given to them as a gift, and they were like, this cheese is bad.
Why?
Because it was pretty dark, like that darker orange color with a lot of the little
nutty flavors.
Yeah, a lot of the little crystal bits in there. And like, I remember we opened the piece and we're like, oh no, that's terrible. And we opened it and we're like, oh my gosh, this is like the best piece ever. And we tried to explain, like, no, that's normal. Like, this is actually a really awesome piece. But he just could not be converted at that point. It takes some time sometimes. And so obviously we happily exchanged it for a less crystallized piece. But I just remember that moment, like, no.
You don't know what you're getting.
You don't know what you're missing. This is like the best piece of cheese.
Yeah.
But do you remember your first like experience with some type of cheese crystal?
I actually remember when I applied to work at Venissimo, on my resume it had, because I was like, I'm applying to a cheese shop, I should absolutely tell them what my favorite cheese is, because that sounded like fun.
Yeah.
And it was Romano, Roomano, which really aged Gouda.
Yeah.
And I feel like in some ways that's often that's a question we often ask new cheesemongers. What's your favorite?
What's your favorite cheese?
Yeah, what's your favorite cheese? Please say it's not smoked Gouda. Tip. But yeah, I was working in the cheese world at Trader Joe's for a number of years before working at Vinissimo, and they had it was a 3-year aged Gouda, similar in flavor to like a ballerina goat Gouda, but made with cow's milk, and that exact same like color that you're talking about, that like almost like you've had
almost like caramel.
Yeah, or like a good cappuccino, you know,
Ooh.
like that like
Now I'm
nutty,
hungry.
hazely nut, flavor where it's like not even orange anymore. It's gone like past that. Yeah, and those fat cheese crystals, that was probably when I first realized that, oh my gosh, you can have this textural difference in cheese and it's really delicious, and where can I get more of this?
Yeah,
So
sure. It's definitely addicting, these cheese crystals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if I have any other like random info.
Well, we do
There's-
have a fun, maybe if you're interested in like vocabulary and science,
Yes.
where the word tyrosine derived from.
Yeah, where?
Oh. Tyro is Greek for cheese. Yeah.
What?
What was the other part though?
Tyros? Yeah. means
Tyros. Cheese. Yeah. So interesting. Fun fact there, if you would like to impress your friends with that, which is right here. Tyrosine.
So if I like get stranded on a Greek island, like the only word I'll know is like
cheese. There you go.
Cheese.
There you
Maybe
go,
that's all I
guys.
need to know. Maybe it's Theros. I'm trying to like
Tyros,
imagine like
yeah.
put my mind in like my big fat Greek wedding. Be like, put some Windex on it. Tyros.
Cool.
Sorry to all of my Greek friends that I have now offended.
Oh,
with
no.
Beautiful language.
Any other last thoughts as we wrap this up, maybe? Or
Just an absolute admiration and, continued fascination at how you can have these 3 simple ingredients, right? Milk, salt, and rennet, which are the 3 ingredients that define something as cheese.
yeah.
Rennet being like the starter cultures. And that how you can have just this immense variety of flavors,
It's crazy.
of products. Even just thinking of like calcium lactate, you see more in cheddars because cheddars have a higher, they're more acidic, right? When people talk about, I really like that like sharp cheddar flavor, that's directly correlated with the high content of lactic acid.
Yeah.
And lactic acid, if you remember, plus calcium is what creates calcium lactate. Whereas, cheesemakers really wanting to pull out that like nice, sweet, not bitter, nutty flavor in those parms and those aged Goudas, and those alpines with adding that lactobacillus
Yeah.
helveticus.
Helveticus.
As just kind of a happenstance byproduct, we get this lovely tyrosine crystal, and it just never ceases to amaze and fascinate me that this wide variety can come out of 3 ingredients.
No, I know. It's crazy. So just to recap too, as you just did. So this one is more a reaction from the culture added to the cheese,
Mhm.
where this is more the reaction of
The acid.
the acid and the lactose.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, I'm totally fascinated by that too. And
awesome.
that's why I love cheese.
What a wonderful world of cheese that we live in.
No, it's never boring.
Nope. Always more to learn.
Always, yeah. So I don't know. We're just 2 cheesemongers trying to
make a difference.
We hope we shed some light on cheese crystals. Like I said, we're not scientists, but we admire many of the cheese scientists and foodies and food geeks out there. And I hope we did you guys justice.
Yeah.
And thanks for letting us share.
And if you guys want to find any of these cheese, you know where to find us.
Yeah.
Vinissimo cheese. Just come in and say, the cheese with like the little crunchy things, and
we will be able to know what you
We're not
mean.
going to judge you. You don't need to remember any of this. You don't need to remember calcium, lactate, or tyrosine.
No. Just remember that it's not mold
Yeah.
and that it's good. Yeah.
That's really good.
Awesome. Well, okay. I guess Gina will be back next week, and thanks for letting us fill in. Thanks, Claire, for coming with me too.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks for having me. It's been fun. Bye.